before we get started, would love to get you guys to either come off mute and let us know kind of what level of procrastination you currently have. So if you were to think about a scale of 1 to 10, how high is your rate of procrastination? And if you don't want to come off mute, just drop that in the chat box. Keen to kind of get a sense for how much procrastination you guys are experiencing today before we get into it.
I'm happy to share, just to be brave.
Go ahead, Steffi.
Just to kick things off, I'm going to say I'm probably about a 6 to a 7. Yep. Yeah. So, fair amount of procrastination going on for me.
Got some good levels of procrastination.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Steph. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm happy to go too.
Yeah, Elkie.
It totally depends. I'm usually pretty good at just going, you know what, just get in and do it. But I'm also doing uni, and I've had to write a lot of essays lately, and I hated them. I finished them now, thank goodness, but that was when I joined up for this class and when it all happened, and I was more than happy to put them off and put them off and put them off and put them off and put them off until they were breathing down my neck, and I just had to do them whether I wanted to or not, or fail my class. So that, it got pretty bad there for a while, and I hated the it was because I really hated the topic of the essays, that I just was more than happy to put it in. But I need to find a way to just do it.
Yep. Okay. Well, we'll definitely have some ideas and some tips for you to share tonight. But it's pretty funny how a lot of procrastinators actually, and maybe this isn't the case for you, Elkie, but become really addicted to the adrenaline hit that they get when, it's a last minute deadline and, oh my goodness, we've got to get it done. And then they get it done and it's just like, oh, this is wonderful. And it actually creates a negative behavior cycle, because you become addicted to that feeling of like the rush of doing things last minute. But very common for procrastinators to have that experience. Iris, between 4 and 8, depending on the task. Okay, hopefully we'll learn a little bit more about that, but it sounds like some tasks are up at the 8, so like high levels of procrastination. Natalie, procrastinator extraordinaire at 7 and 8. Thank you for your share. Alicia, 8 or 9, also looks like a bit of extraordinaire in the procrastination department. Steph's also saying very relatable. Yes, Ellie functions so well under pressure, and Danny's also doing some procrastination at about the 6th level. I used to have the same challenge, functioning really well under pressure. I used to thrive, but for me, it was very much about the adrenaline hit, and it was all just about getting things just in time and then getting them done, and then it was finally done, and that can become a really addictive behavior. Right. So you guys can see my screen. We're going to get straight into the session, and I will share with you shortly after a brief intro on me exactly what we're going to be talking about tonight. So who am I? My name is Rema Lolas, and I'm a leadership and development coach. I've been coaching for a number of years now, and prior to that, I spent a couple of decades in the high-tech industry in global leadership positions, with a really strong background in training and enablement. So it's a huge passion of mine to train, enable, and bring value to people. And for me, it's my mission really to empower individuals and organizations, because I come from a bit of a corporate background, but corporates, business owners, and individuals to really get what they want and do that without self-sacrifice by mastering leadership of themselves. So that's self-leadership. I've got a ton of qualifications, including an MCF accreditation. So kind of gives you the check of who I am and where I come from a little bit on the coaching background. All right, so let's get into the topic of procrastination. Feel free at any point in time to drop some questions in the chat, and I'll keep my eye on that, and I can get those answered for you guys as well. So what we're going to talk about today is like, what is procrastination? Why do people procrastinate? And it comes for no worries at all about the mic. Why do people procrastinate, there are so many reasons, and we're going to explore a bunch of these reasons. So you're going to have an opportunity to kind of test and gauge whether some of those are aligned to you and the reasons you procrastinate or otherwise. We're going to share some tips to beat your procrastination. We'll have some question time. So any questions that we haven't answered through hopefully what will be an interactive conversation. And then I'll have hopefully time for a hot seat coaching. So if one of you would like to get coached on your procrastination, we'll have some time at the end to tackle that for you and try and get underneath to understand what's going on and how you might be able to solve that for yourself. So with that, we're going to get into the content. So what is procrastination? Right. So the definition of procrastination, I'm sure you guys all know this, but procrastination is basically the action of unnecessarily and voluntarily delaying or postponing something, even if you know that it's important or that it will have a negative consequence. So that's just a definition that I ripped off the internet so that we're all playing on the same understanding of procrastination. And I actually took the dictionary screenshot because I thought this was hilarious. I don't know if any of you have ever looked up the definition of procrastination, but not only is it the action of delaying or postponing something, but it similar words include dithering and humming and hawing and dilly-dallying and shilly-shallying and kicking the can down the road. So I thought that was pretty funny. If one of those made you laugh, go ahead and drop that in the chat box, but I had a bit of a giggle when I saw that. So we all understand what procrastination is, right? It's that feeling that's like, you know, you've got to get something done, but basically you stop yourself from doing it. And you're probably unconscious to what's stopping you, but you can waste a lot of time procrastinating and making any excuse under the sun to not go after or do what it is that you wanted to get done. So whether it's something that you really don't want to do, or it is something that you do want to do and happen to be procrastinating on that as well. So there's one main reason, whether it's conscious or not, why people tend to procrastinate. And that is the 4-letter F word. Fear. So fear is what ultimately holds most people back from getting done what they want to get done, right? So have a think about what is the fear or the pain that you are avoiding when you're procrastinating. So if you're procrastinating, you've likely associated some type of pain to the task or the goal that you want to achieve. And therefore, it's not being completed or even started, probably in most cases. So think about, for example, when you think about fear, think about the fear of failure, right? So perfectionism is really the fear of failure and worrying about the criticism that might come from other people or the self-judgment that you might get from your own inner critic. And think about like what it would mean to others. People who struggle with low confidence or tend to doubt themselves a lot typically hesitate to start something or start a task because they question their abilities. They question whether they're going to be able to get it done. They fear that they won't be able to meet their own or others' expectations of them. So that's the 4-letter F word, fear, playing up for the fear of failure, and perfectionism plays there. The fear of being found out. Do you have imposter syndrome running? Like think that someone's going to find you a phony or a fake and that you don't really know what you're doing. So the fear of not knowing how, the fear of being found out. Let me tell you this, no one knew how to do anything the first time. So that's a big fear that drives people. Another big fear that shows up when people are procrastinating is the fear of asking for help. So if something feels too big and daunting, or they have like a fear of exhaustion, if it's going to be so big, perhaps they have a fear of that exhaustion or a fear of asking for help from others to get something done. So they're just some examples of how fear shows up when people are procrastinating. So can I get just a yay or a yes or a why if when I shared one of those, it resonated with you? Yep. Yes, absolutely. Yep. Okay. Anyone brave enough to share any more details with us tonight? Thanks, Danny. Thanks, Alicia, Iris. It looks like we've got answers from just about everyone. Okay, so there's definitely fear driving folks. Anyone keen to have a share or even just drop it in the chat? The fear of failure, perfectionism. Yeah, Beck, it's a really common one, right? And we'll talk about perfectionism in a little bit more detail in a couple of slides as well, because it's a real biggie. Not meeting expectations. Thanks for the share, Iris. Okay, so there's fear. Now, the other thing that really drives procrastination is a lack of motivation. And so oftentimes when there's a lack of clear sense of purpose, hey, Justine, welcome. Lovely to see you. When people lack a clear sense of purpose or motivation for doing something, then they find it difficult to get started, right? So without a compelling reason to begin, people tend to delay or procrastinate, and it can be really strong, right? So we're always going to avoid anything that causes us pain, right? Even if it's something that we want. And so if we're not motivated equally towards the positive and for the good reasons and the things that actually are compelling to us, it's going to be really challenging to get off the couch or get out of procrastination land and achieve what it is that you want. So I want to dive into motivation in a little bit more detail for you, just so that you understand how the motivation strategy works for folks. So here we see motivation as motivation away from or motivation towards. And so when we're moving away from something, we're moving away from something painful. And most of the people I coach, or most people in general, are moving away from something they don't want. And they tend to forget about what it is that they're moving towards, right? So when you think about, it could be lots of different things, but you might be thinking about what you don't want in a job rather than what you do want. Or you want to move away from, the extra kilos that we put on over Christmas with all the extra indulging that we do, but we don't focus on the forward and the pleasure of having great fitness and fitting in our beautiful dresses and whatever else might be going on for us. So motivation is about having a balance. If you're away from motivated, it's really important to start thinking about what you're moving towards. So when someone's procrastinating, they're typically moving away from the pain, or they've associated pain to the thing that they want to do. So the goal is to really start to understand what is the pleasure in doing what it is that you want to do, so that you can start to build the motivation towards that thing that you want to achieve for yourself. And when that can outweigh the pain, the pleasure can outweigh the pain, that's when you're going to be able to get off your butt and get out of procrastination land, right? The other thing here is that to have that pleasure, people typically want to have a clear intention, right? I'll talk about that a little bit more, like purpose. And we're going to talk about intentionality in just a moment. But when you can add like massive pleasure to what you're moving towards and what you want to achieve, and that outweighs your fear, and you have a big why, a big reason, a big purpose about why you want to do that, then again, that drives the motivation, and it's going to help you get out of procrastination and get into action. So Isaac Newton says, he's got a law that basically says an object an object that's still will maintain stillness, but an object in motion will maintain momentum. So it's really about getting enough motivation to be able to move forward and get that momentum for yourself. Iris has said, sometimes finding pain is a lot more clearly defined than future distant pleasure. Yeah, absolutely. It's so easy to focus on what's here and now. And we're going to talk about some of the other ways this sometimes shows up, Iris, in terms of like when you think about the future distant pleasure, if we're thinking about such a massive goal that's so far away, it can feel so daunting and exhausting. And so we've got to think about how we can break that down into smaller, more manageable pieces. And so we'll talk a little bit about that for you as well tonight. So that's a little bit more about the motivation strategy, right? So it's really about if you're procrastinating and you're moving away from something painful, what is it that's actually going to motivate you? So what's the other side that you actually want to move towards, the pleasurable stuff that will kind of get you moving out and on your way out of procrastination. It'll also, as soon as you start moving forward, you'll start to build confidence, you'll gain momentum and keep moving. Everyone might have different scenarios. Maybe we'll hear one of those. If one of them is brewing for you guys, have a think about it, because I'd be happy to coach to one of those specific scenarios when we get to hot seat coaching. Okay, so then we also have kind of time management and intentionality. So what do I mean by these two things, right? We all have the same number of hours in the day, right? Does anyone have any more than 24 hours in the day? I don't think so. I can't see anyone's hands, but I'm just going to assume that no one's hands are up. So it's how we choose to spend these hours that makes the difference in terms of any progress that we want to make, right? And so generally, I think you'd probably agree with me if I would say that you don't have a problem with time management. And I know this because if I was to give you lots of fun things to do or take you on like an amazing holiday, I'm pretty sure that you won't sit around and procrastinate on the couch on your time away, right? So these things typically show up when we've got things to do that we don't want to do or have some fear associated with them. So overwhelm and poor time management is generally a challenge when someone is feeling like, so that poor time management rather shows up when people are feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude or the complexity of something that they want to achieve. So in the example Iris just gave us, like, yeah, sometimes we find the pain a lot more clearly because oftentimes the pleasure is so far in the distance. Yeah, and that can feel really large and really overwhelming. And so that can really make it difficult to plan your time and celebrate the small wins along the way to get to where you want to go. But if you're not starting to work through that and failing to break things into smaller tasks, then it's going to make it really challenging to stop procrastinating. So time management's one part of it, right? So we want to work out, like, if this is what we want to do, how do we realistically manage our time so we're not thinking really big and really huge complex tasks? And then intention. So I talked a little bit about motivation on the previous page, but intentionality is really important, right? Because if you're not intentional, then you're being attentional, right? And I like to call that shiny object syndrome. So if you're not really intentional and have a really big why, a really big purpose, a really big meaning as to why you want to achieve something, then it's going to be really hard to get on and follow the path towards achieving that for yourself. And oftentimes, when we have something that's really big and really daunting and we're procrastinating on, we find it much easier to be attentional and just take care of all of the other little busy tasks that pop up in our day that distract us from the things that we really want to achieve. And so we continue to procrastinate by not just sitting on the couch, but by busying our time through all of the things that pop up that aren't really meaningful to us, right? They might be something that your boss wants you to do at the office place. It might be just little tasks around the house that, sure, they need to be done, but they're not really urgent. But all of these, all of a sudden, when you're procrastinating on something really big or something that you want to do that you're a bit afraid of, these other things tend to show up and you tend to want to focus on them and get them done to kind of distract yourself. Also part of procrastination. Is that making sense? Do we have any questions so far? A couple of seconds to type, or if anyone wants to come off of mute and ask a question, I'd be happy to help help with that. Or if you're piling your questions up, you can pop them in the chat. Haven't heard of intentionality before. Yeah. So it's really about if you don't have an intention, you're getting, your focus is on everything that takes your attention, right? And so they're all like the little busy things. This is also like when you're thinking about goal setting or how you want to spend your time in your week, you want to be really intentional about the big rocks that you want to get done for yourself, because otherwise, think about kind of a jar. And if you don't have the big rocks in the jar first, and you start to fill the jar with sand, like all the little bits and pieces, there's no time for the big rocks that are really intentional, that you want to get really intentional about and really meaningful for. So if you're not being intentional, you're typically being attentional. Absolutely. Thanks, Iris. All right, so let's have a look at some of the behaviors that get in the way and cause procrastination. The first is perfectionism, right? So a few of you mentioned that at the beginning of the call when you were dropping it in the chat box. So perfectionism comes in two different flavors. We have perfectionists who start but are never finished, because let's be real, perfect does not exist, right? So a perfectionist on that end of the spectrum is kind of going, and there is no off button because nothing's ever perfect. Let me know if perfectionist definition 1 is one that relates to you, right? But the other flavor of perfectionism is what I call a skeptic, someone who is so perfectionist as well, but they're afraid to start because they're not going to get it right. And they're not going to be able to get it right first go, right? And that is going to drive a ton of procrastination. So that fear of failure, that fear of not getting it right. But again, when you think about everything that you've learned growing up, including walking and talking and running and everything else, right? There is no such thing as getting things right the first go. And so keeping that in mind, when you've got that fear of not knowing how to do something, the beauty really is in the journey, and it really is in just starting. And once you start, you've got that momentum, and you can learn, and you can revise, and you can change tacks, and you can continue towards your path. But perfectionism will often lead to procrastination for that very reason, that fear that we spoke about a little bit earlier. The next one here is what I call all or nothing thinking. So if you tend to think in like all or nothing, like yes and no, very polar opposites, like day and night type thinking, like it's all or nothing, then chances are you probably have some challenges with procrastination also. And this comes down to very similar to the perfectionist who doesn't start until they can get it all done. This distortion of sorts means that people want to get it all done at once rather than chunk it down and think through the journey. So if you tend to think in all or nothing, like get everything all done at once or not at all, then you're going to potentially be struggling from procrastination for that reason. So if you don't do anything by halves or by chunking down, and you tend to want to get everything done all at once, then there's a chance that that would be fueling that for you. All or nothing people typically struggle with self-discipline and self-regulation, right? So it can be challenging to resist. Like if you're not getting immediate gratification and getting everything completed, you tend to, again, take distractions in favor of working on a task that's more complex, again, the all or nothing thinking, then that's going to be something that holds you back to getting that major goal for yourself. The third one is discounting. What do I mean by that? This discounting is basically mentally rejecting or disqualifying anything that you have already done, or any possible successes or any progress that you've made. And you focus instead on what you haven't done, what you can't do, what you need to do. And so discounting is essentially, we put all of the good stuff that we've already achieved back here, and we forget that it's there. And so we don't count all of the little things that we've done along the way or throughout the day or even on a project. And we focus on big stuff that we haven't done and can't do in front of us. And so if you're discounting all of the things that you have achieved, procrastination creeps in pretty quickly because you're constantly focused on the stuff that still needs to be done. And so that can become quite exhausting and therefore drive some procrastination for you. Welcome to those who've just joined. The next one is responsibility. What might I mean by that? So when you're having a look at procrastinating on something, one of the questions you might like to ask yourself is this mine to do, right? We've raised and enculturated in so many ways. I'm more of a get lost in the possibilities and not pick one. Yeah, okay, so you do lots of options and not necessarily follow like a procedure type thing. That sounds a little like intentionality rather than intentionality, right? And it'd be interesting to know, Iris, from yourself, if that's kind of like a fear of missing out or, where the indecisiveness potentially comes from. So really interesting. Thanks for that share. Back on this responsibility one, is the task actually yours, right? So we've been enculturated to kind of say yes and take more on and prove ourselves and our worth by doing lots of different stuff. Oftentimes we get to a point where we've been like over responsible for other people and for their stuff, what they should be responsible for so long that we get to almost a state of burnout, and that can create procrastination. If you've said yes to doing something that you actually don't want to do, you can imagine your motivation is going to be pretty low on that thing. And so it would indicate that if you're kind of saying yes and don't have the ability to say no, that you're probably challenged with boundaries as well. But if the task or the goal that needs to be met is not really yours, or you have no motivation to do it, and you've said yes to something perhaps that you didn't really want to say yes to, then procrastination is absolutely going to take over, and you're going to find it really challenging to be motivated to do that. If this is an area that you guys are or you individually, all of you on the call, are challenged with, feel free to drop me a DM or an email. I'll share my details at the end of this deck. And I'd be happy to share with you a tool that I've developed called the Boundary Blueprint, which you can work through. So if boundaries are an issue, you can let me know and I can get that to you. But that's another big one in terms of responsibility. Is the stuff that you need to do yours? And if it's not, then absolutely going to be a driver of procrastination. And the last one in terms of the behaviors that I wanted to touch on today. So as you can see, there's lots of different reasons why people procrastinate, and it's about working out which one of these resonates most with you so that you can start to get underneath it to work through it. But we all have values, right? Sometimes we think of our values as they're a little bit more aspirational, what we're told that we should be, like loyal and honest, and sure, they're values. But when I talk about values, I talk about values about the things that we actually value and spend our time on, the things that you'll spend money on. When you have values, they help you decide everything from who you spend time with to the clothes that you wear, to the TV programs that you watch, all of these different things. But when you have a values conflict, so two values that conflict with each other, then that's going to absolutely create some procrastination for you. So let me give you an example. If you're if you value achieving really highly and getting things done, but also value like fitting in and moving away from rejection, which we see quite often, right? People are a little bit afraid of success because they might not fit in, a little bit like tall poppy syndrome. Then guess what's going to take over? It's the stuff the pain that we move away from. If that outweighs the pleasure, as we spoke a little bit about in the motivation, and we can have. Hey, Alex, just muted you. Let's remove that person. Steffi, you might want to remove a couple of those last people that came in.
Yeah.
And I'd suggest maybe these Russian letters might be coming in from the same place.
Yeah.
So let me go back to values conflict. So if you've got two values that conflict with each other, and one's like a painful one and one's a pleasurable one, the painful one is always going to outweigh. So another example would be like if you value going on a big adventure and you absolutely love adventuring and love traveling, but you also value security and safety, then chances are you're going to procrastinate on taking that trip if it has any kind of risk associated with it. So you start to think about the different types of values that you have, the things that you value, and whether any of those are potentially in conflict that are stopping you and really fueling that procrastination. I'm going to pause there to see if we have any questions. Great question, Iris. So how do you resolve a value conflict to move forward? So if you have two values that are at conflict, then what you want to do, or something that if you feel like you're procrastinating because you're kind of like, oh, I want to do this, but this is really important to me too. It's really about breaking down and starting to have a look into those values and understanding which ones are kind of like moving away from some kind of pain and which one's going to create some pleasure, and really starting to decide for yourself which one, because our values come in high, like basically have a priority order. So you want to have a look at where your values are, how they stack rank with each other. So if you have those two values that are in conflict, you want to kind of just assess them and then work out which ones you want to place in priority order. And if it's not currently working for you, it's an opportunity to review and reassess those, Iris. What other questions do we have? So I feel like I resonate with a little bit of each of these. Okay, Ellie, that's pretty common, right? Because A, we're all human, and B, we're just trying to work it out. So the first thing that I think is most important here is to bring awareness to what's going on for you. And just to really be able to go inside and just be honest with yourself and be like, okay, so what's going on here that's stopping me from taking action? And usually your inner self is going to be able to guide what that challenge is for you. And depending on the situation, right? So depending on what you're procrastinating on, so they might resonate, but probably in different contexts or different scenarios for you. And then once you understand in a particular context or example, you can start to unpick that and understand how to start to move forward with it. And we're gonna cover off some tips shortly that'll help with that as well. Yeah, Justine, totally hear you. Sometimes the task is overwhelming or just plain hard. Absolutely. And so we'll talk a little bit about this as well in the tips, but sometimes when a task is so complex and so large and so overwhelming, the goal is to really start to understand what that task involves and start to break that down into smaller, more manageable pieces, or what I like to call chunks. Because when you can do that, then what you can do is start to get some small chunks done and start to get some momentum for yourself, right? Get something completed, celebrate that you completed it, get the next bit completed. And all of a sudden, if you start to create that process for yourself, you'll find that you've completed the overwhelming task. But if we focus on all of it, so that all or nothing thinking, then we tend to have a fear of how complex and how large it is and how exhausting it's going to be. And am I actually going to be able to work this out for myself? And yeah, we can absolutely overwhelm ourselves and stop ourselves from taking any action whatsoever. So the key is to take small actions and to get started with small actions. So you try breaking that down into smaller, more manageable pieces. So let's talk through some tips, right? If you're looking to break free from procrastination, the first tip is going to be get really intentional and prioritize your larger tasks, right? So pick the larger task and then chunk those larger tasks into smaller tasks, because then it's going to feel a lot less overwhelming than what it does when it's a really big, far in the distant. It's really hard to really wrap your head around it. So when you can do that and you can create some smaller tasks that you can get done in a really quick amount of time, then you're going to start to create some momentum for you. When you can get intentional, you can start to think about like, you know, what is on my to-do list, or what is the stuff that is there. You might be procrastinating on a lot of things, not necessarily just one task, right? What are the things that you really need to do first? What things, if any, can be deleted off your list because they're not really yours, or they're not really a priority. They're just, you know, stocking fillers that you've just popped on your to-do list to procrastinate further. What, if anything, could you delegate to somebody else, whether it's on your team at work, to someone at home like hubby, or otherwise? And what things don't need to happen right now? So you can have a look at either some tools that you can look at are Eisenhower's priority matrix, or Stephen Covey's. He also does it in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He talks about prioritization, and they both have a very similar tool that helps you to kind of get really intentional about what you're focusing on and prioritizing your day. Identify what you are fearing, right? So if fear is driving you, what are you afraid of, right? Really get in and ask yourself, like, what is the fear, or what do I fear happening? Like, what is the worst case scenario that I'm running in my mind about getting this thing done or getting started? When you're aware of that fear, then you're going to be able to consider whether it's actually a real fear or something really that's going to happen, or if it's just something imaginary that you've created that's really stopping you or paralyzing you from taking steps forward. That's going to be really true for any of you who are, you know, who have perfectionist traits, or are afraid of, you know, what might happen or being found out, or fear of failure type stuff when it comes to your procrastination. Don't sit on the smaller tasks, right? So even if you have small tasks and it's not a large task that you're chunking down, try and get them done. There's a great, the name has escaped me, but if you look up the 2-minute rule, if you can get things done and you can chunk them down and just get them done quickly, anything that can be done in less than 2 minutes is something you should just get going and get doing. Because once you've done that, you're going to find that you're in motion, you'll build momentum, and you'll be able to get more and more of your tasks done. Or if it's something larger, once you started and you're in momentum, you're going to be able to achieve so much more for yourself. So stop multitasking. If you're currently multitasking, it's a big driver of procrastination. So one of the keys here is to really think about, again, getting really intentional about what it is that you want to achieve, and focusing in on those tasks, like doing one task at a time so that you can get things completed, which then allows you to celebrate completing that, which then motivates you to get onto the next thing. And then remove distractions so that you can hold your concentration, right? So again, this is about stop multitasking and really start to focus in on the things that you want to achieve for yourself. So let's just go back to questions. We're at Beck. How do we re-find the motivation to work on a project when you have worked so hard on it and there has been no acknowledgement of your contribution? So Beck, sounds like this might be a work scenario. In terms of finding the motivation to work on something, it's really about bringing meaning to the work that you're doing, right? And when you want to work to build your motivation, it can be challenging if it's not being acknowledged and your contribution's not being acknowledged. So that there's perhaps a communication or a conversation that could be had in the particular situation. I don't have much detail, so I'll give you kind of a high level response to the question. But anytime you want to re-find motivation, or find some, get excited about something again, you need to bring meaning to it. And to bring meaning to it, we ask why it's important, right? So the work that you're doing, you started this project for a reason. So it's about reconnecting to the reasons that you actually got in touch with or started that project in the first place, and putting more emphasis on those reasons rather than necessarily the acknowledgement of contribution. Again, I don't know the situation, so I'm sure you're absolutely deserving of all of the credit that you're getting. But just want to, so in terms of the motivation piece, as we talk about procrastination, it can be really hard to kind of get going again if you're not feeling motivated in that sense. But I would tackle that a little bit differently and have a conversation with whoever is perhaps not acknowledging the contribution, or finding a way to acknowledge yourself, right? Because sometimes we look for that acknowledgement and that recognition outside of us when you could potentially be providing that to yourself, and counting that for yourself too. I'm not sure what you were, I might have made a comment for you, Ellie, in terms of the resonation stuff. A friend uses the 7 rule, 7 seconds, 7 minutes, 7 hours, 7 days, etc. How would you use this to help make he would use this to help make decisions. Absolutely. So you can use a 7 rule. I usually do, like, for procrastinating, I always use like the 2 minute, like if something can be done in less than 2 minutes, just get it done. And then if it's something really big, break it down so that there are small pieces that you can just get done. Because even if you just pick some of the easier parts of something, it's going to get you into movement, get you into action, get you into momentum, and allow you to move forward. Stop multitasking is a real challenge. I feel like I'm multitasking 90% of the time. Oh, Justine, I know all about that, mate. I used to be queen multitasker, but let me tell you, if you could work out in your day, or even just start by segmenting smaller parts of your day where you can just focus on one thing to get that thing completed, you're going to feel so much relief and so much less overwhelmed from all of the multitasking. Because multitaskers, again, tend to start lots of different things and think they're really efficient. And not you specifically, Justine, but all of us, we think we're really efficient getting all of these things done. We kind of get through the day and go, nothing's done. And it's like day after day after day. And so once you've done that so many days, you're like, I really don't have the motivation to do anything right now. The goal is to pick something, get it done, or get as much of it done as possible, right? And then celebrate that. Because when you can start to get things checked off, you're going to feel much more comfortable and much more confident about moving forward. And that'll start to build your motivation and your confidence again too. Becca was the director of the business unit, right? So yeah, there's a few different things in there. I certainly don't want to speak ill of the director. Perhaps they're not aware of the contribution that you're providing, Beck. So maybe there's a conversation there. Perhaps there's a little bit of check-in on like the recognition and how meaningful that is for you, and how else potentially there could be recognition in that, and then finding motivation in the big meanings around what it is that you're working on specifically. But I typically guide you to have a conversation and have a think through how you can have a conversation with that director. But hopefully you guys found that really helpful and informative also. You're able to take a few tidbits away from what is potentially driving your procrastination and some tips on how you can overcome that. But if anyone wants to get in touch or keep in contact or follow along for more tips and all sorts of fun stuff, you can follow me at Mind Matrix Coaching or at Mind Matrix Coach on Instagram, or feel free to drop me an email at any point in time. Would be happy to answer any further questions.